I'll talk a little bit about that in three of the points that I really want to emphasize this morning. But it really was during those formative years in small town where my father, although he was not actively involved politically, he was always very interested in the political scene. And I can remember going over to Jackson and Humboldt and even to Alamo, which was the county seat in Crockett County, during the gubernatorial campaigns. Frank Clement, I remember Frank Clement, the orator that he was. I see some kids nodding there, people that remember the Frank Clement era. But it was really during those very formative years that I grew to really appreciate public service. I went to Union University. Thoroughly enjoyed that small liberal arts Baptist college environment. My major academic work was in history and political science. Thoroughly enjoyed just continuing the study of the political process. Had a great formative period of education while at Union University. Taught school for a year in the midst of the Vietnam War. Didn't enjoy teaching. Knew that I really needed to step forward and meet my military commitments. So I spent 2 years in the Army. Got out of the Army and decided to go into graduate school at the University of Memphis, which was Memphis State at the time. I got my master's degree. It was at that time that I really started to get involved in corrections work. And for the next 30 years or so, really devoted myself to public service through the field of corrections. The field of corrections was so interesting, and the Sheriff Doohan, you know a little bit about jails and people that commit crime. I've never really figured out the criminal mind. The criminal mind to me is fascinating. I've never quite understood it. And I think that's why I stayed working in that field for so long, is that there are people who are in our jails and prisons that need to be there. But there are also those in our jails and prisons that, but for the grace of God, they're mine. And the prison population and the issues of criminal justice really, I think, point out some of the things that we as public officials need to focus on. Because as I matriculated in the criminal justice system for some 30 years, working in a variety of prisons in a variety of different capacities, if you start to look at the people that are in our criminal justice system, what you see, for the most part, are people that, number one, come from very dysfunctional families. Number two, have dropped out of our school system. Number three, don't have a strong faith foundation. And it just goes on and on to see those breakdowns in their background and their formative years. Now, that said, they must be held accountable. They must be held accountable. But when you start to look at the issues of family, education, faith, getting along with others, partnership, all of those issues that really make our society work and make us as individuals work. When those things, when those very critical elements, the formative elements of life start to break down, you realize that that's where we as a society need to focus. And that was one of the things I found interesting about the field of corrections, because in one sense, you hold people accountable for breaking the law. But in another sense, it really points out to you and to us what our responsibilities are from a societal standpoint to make sure that we have the type of society that fosters the growth of people in a positive way as opposed to the way of criminal behavior. So I worked in the criminal justice field my entire life, even to this day. As the county mayor, I have a workhouse of about 3,000 inmates. And Mayor, we have a large number of state inmates in our workhouse. About 70% of our inmate population in our workhouse are state inmates. So to this day, I still am involved in the field of criminal justice. But certainly when I look back over the career that I've had in public service, there are really 3 points that I would reflect upon that have been guiding principles for me in my public service. First of all is the importance of treating people civilly and with respect. And when I talk about civility and respect, I mean that is the people we serve. You know, we are hired and we are terminated by our voters, by our citizens, and our first responsibility is to them. I take the term public servant to be precisely what it says. We are servants. We're servants of the people. We have to respect the will of the people. We don't necessarily always agree with the input that we receive from the citizens, but we certainly owe all of our citizens the respect that they deserve. I've never quite understood those public servants that, number one, don't return their phone calls. Number two, refuse to get out in the community. Number three, do not accept visitors in their office, and there are some that don't do that. I'm sure there are not any in here, but certainly when you are elected to public office and you're serving as a public servant, then you serve the public. I go back to the old biblical principles of the servanthood of the believer that talks throughout the biblical text. It talks about servanthood of the believers. I believe that we in public service should be those types of servants, where we do get out in the community, where we do get out and show respect for divergent opinions, that we do our best to build those relationships. I've often said that really the success of the county mayor, they're saying, is a little bit different from the success of city mayors. Because your success as a county mayor, my success as a county mayor, depends upon our ability to get out and build relationships with, in Hardeman County, 9 other city mayors. And if you can't build a working relationship with those 9 city mayors, then it's going to make your job increasingly more difficult. If you don't build a relationship with your 16 county commissioners, a personal relationship with your 16 county commissioners, that will determine just how successful you're going to be. And building that relationship requires civil discourse, relationships, and partnerships. Our work as public servants is all about building partnerships, building relationships, respecting the interest of others, and reacting in a very positive way. Integrity, the second point, very important. You know, for a person to get involved in public service to begin with, it's a person who's self-assured, it's a person that has a great deal of self-confidence. There's not a one of you that ran for public office that didn't think you were the best person for that job. If you thought that someone else was better than you, then you shouldn't have gotten involved. But you got involved because you felt that you had something to bring to the public arena that distinguished you from your opponent. And you were elected. So there were others out there that also felt the same way about you. Now, the integrity part of this is that you keep in mind that, number one, you do have convictions. You do have convictions that you work on, that you promote, but you also maintain that sensitivity to the respect and the wishes and the thoughts of others. Confidence and pride is something that you have to have if you're going to be successful in your work. But oftentimes, confidence and pride can manifest into cockiness and entitlement, where you once again lose touch and lose reality. You know, I say my prayers at night, and I never pray to vanquish my opponent. I always pray for patience, insight, wisdom, forbearance, sensitivity. Because if you will exercise those qualities of patience, insight, sensitivity, respect, you'll make the right decisions. You'll stay in touch with the people that you're working with. You'll not be consumed by the issues of entitlement and cockiness. Mayor Doolin, I was talking to him earlier that when I was first elected sheriff, I was attending the new sheriff's school up in Nashville, which is a state requirement. When you're elected sheriff, you have to go through this new school. And I remember the year that I was elected sheriff, 2002, there were 30 sheriffs that we needed. And in the course of the week-long session with new sheriffs, one of the instructors stood up and said, at the end of 4 years, 10% of you will be indicted. 10% of you, so that's 3 out of 30. Well, at the end of 4 years, 4 had been indicted. 4 sheriffs, 4 new sheriffs had been indicted and were being tried. Integrity. Their integrity. At some point in the course of that period, confidence and self-assuredness failed, and cockiness and entitlement took over. Once again, losing touch with the base. How important it is. How often have you as an elected official heard from citizens that have said, well, hey, you're a commissioner, you're a mayor, you can do that. Well, maybe you can, maybe you can't. But understanding what you can and cannot do is vitally important. Understanding how to work the system is vitally important. But understanding your limitations and what you cannot do is vitally important. Integrity. Third point, it's always important to listen to a diverse range of options. You don't have to accept them all. You don't have to believe that they're even correct. But as servants, you owe it to your constituency to at least consider all options that are presented to you. And then having the wisdom and having the insight to know how to distinguish between what is good and what is not good for your citizens. A wise man can entertain the ideas of others without accepting them. But how important it is that you study the issues, that you understand the importance of issues, and that you certainly react to those issues in the appropriate way. You know, I would close by saying that one of the greatest joys that I've had in life is the ability to serve others. Once again, going back to that calling, I think we are endowed with spiritual gifts. I think any of you who are faith-based, have a strong faith foundation, can appreciate those passages in the New Testament that refer to spiritual gifts. Spiritual gifts talk about everything from financial support of worthy causes to stewardship, which is part of what we do as public servants, but it lists a whole range of spiritual gifts. And I think what is important for us to do as public servants is that we understand what our gifts are and that we work to implement those gifts for the greater good of the people. But not only do we do it for ourselves, but as leaders in our community, that we also look for ways to identify, to recognize, and to exploit the spiritual gifts of those people in our community. Because as public officials, you accomplish very little alone. The best thing that you can do is to convene in your community those people with the special gifts, with the special talents that can be applied to whatever the issue is. In my county, the greatest challenges that we have are in the areas of education and job development. I'm not an educator by profession, but I know where to go to convene those people that can really move our education system forward. Job development, creating a workforce in your community that will sustain your community economically going forward. You as a public official probably don't have the answer to that, but there are people in your community that have those special skills and those special gifts that they can move your community forward economically. Recognizing the gifts of your community, convening those talents around whatever the issue might be, is what you can do most to further the future of Hardeman County. And as you say your prayers tonight, thank God for the opportunity that you have to serve. But also, that's God's guidance, God's direction, to help you establish those goals and to support and develop those opportunities that will move your community forward. Always remembering that you're a servant as a leader. Thank you so much for the opportunity to drive down the road from Shelby County to leave the big city for a brief period of time to get out to the beautiful communities. As I drove up from Memphis, we drove through Oakland, we drove through Somerville, we drove through Whiteville, and what beautiful memories that it brought by. enjoy your community, enjoy the opportunity that you have to lead your community.